In northern Montana, during January 1978, the light shining from Vernon Hadley's barn that winter initially drew little notice. It was merely a kerosene lamp. Locals assumed he might be toiling late on his equipment, but the illumination persisted steadily every night, even when winds howled from Canada at 40 miles per hour and temperatures plummeted to 20 below zero. What they were unaware of, what remained unseen through the weathered wooden planks, was that Vernon wasn't storing hay or repairing machinery. He was, in fact, living within a corrugated steel tunnel he had constructed right in the barn's center, a 12 by 20-foot Quonset hut, shimmering like a silver chrysalis, situated 40 feet from the closest exterior wall. The entire county believed he had gone mad. Vernon's initial cabin, situated 200 yards to the east, was a respectable dwelling by frontier measures, chinked logs and a stone foundation. Yet the wind exploited every crevice. The firewood stack remained wet under tarps that never fully secured it, and the year's propane allocation was both pricey and undependable. Thus, Vernon undertook an action no one foresaw. He constructed something smaller. He built it indoors. And when the most frigid blizzard in 45 years buried Montana beneath 6 feet of snow and windshields registered 70 below zero, the individuals who had previously called him a coward fell silent. Should you wish to witness the temperature reading that silenced the county's most skilled builders, please remain until the conclusion and click the like button. Subscribe to receive a weekly technique that proved successful when survival was not a choice, and share your viewing location in the comments. Let's begin. Vernon Hadley was not an eccentric person. He was a 42-year-old ranch laborer. He was a former Navy CB, the type of person capable of welding a fractured axle at midnight and having it reinstalled beneath a tractor by dawn. He had constructed his own cabin in 1974, personally felling the logs and erecting a fieldstone chimney that drew smoke cleanly. Yet after 4 winters, he was consuming 12 cords of wood annually and still awoke to find frost on the interior of his windows. The underlying problems were evident once examined. The cabin was situated on an exposed elevation, capturing the northwest wind like a sail. His firewood storage shed was located 30 yards away, open on 3 sides. Each piece of split pine he transported indoors carried moisture, causing it to hiss and smoke rather than burn efficiently. The draft originating from the floorboards was so potent it could extinguish a candle 6 feet from the hearth. Vernon comprehended the equation. Increased usage would entail more cutting, more hauling, and more time diverted from tending to his livestock. And in January of '78, with propane prices having doubled and delivery trucks immobilized on impassable roads, burning fuel inefficiently was not merely a matter of discomfort. It presented a hazard. He had been considering insulation, mounding earth against the foundation, and constructing a vestibule. Then in November, he came across the Quonset. A neighbor situated 2 valleys distant was dismantling an old equipment shed, military surplus, likely originating from the '50s. It consisted of corrugated steel arches, each 8 feet wide, bolted together to form a tunnel. This was the sort of structure the Army employed for diverse uses, from storage to field hospitals, being lightweight, portable, and airtight when properly erected. Vernon purchased the entire unit for $60 and a case of beer. His strategy was straightforward. His intention was to assemble it within the barn, not alongside it, nor connected to it. The barn itself measured 40 by 60 feet, having been constructed in the 1920s with hand-hewn beams and plank siding. Light seeped through countless cracks, but its underlying structure was robust. Vernon cleared the central bay and swept the dirt floor until it was level. He began bolting the arches together onto a timber frame, creating a structure 12 feet wide, 20 feet long, and 7 feet high at its peak. This half-cylinder of ribbed steel fit entirely within the barn's perimeter, with 20 feet of clearance on all sides. He insulated the concrete floor with sawdust, packing it 8 inches deep, then covered it with planks. He cut an opening for a door at one end and installed a small barrel stove. It was nothing elaborate, simply a vertical drum with a 6-inch stovepipe venting upwards and out through the barn roof. He constructed shelving along the interior walls and suspended a kerosene lamp from the ridgeline. He then implemented what might be termed a layered protection concept. The Quonset's outer shell prevented heat transfer by convection. The surrounding barn shielded it from wind, and the space between them served as an insulating buffer. This created an unintended thermal barrier, effectively reducing heat escape much like a vacuum flask. However, Vernon chose not to articulate it in such terms. Upon inquiry from his neighbor about his activities, Vernon simply stated his weariness of the cold, which marked the beginning of the mockery. Envision this: a gleaming, tunnel-shaped structure positioned centrally within a vast barn, encircled by stacks of hay and disused machinery, illuminated internally by the faint glow of a solitary fire. It resembled a survival shelter, giving the impression of someone secluded from society. To most observers, it appeared utterly irrational, yet its underlying engineering, whether by design or chance, possessed greater ingenuity than was evident. The Quonset hut's design was inherently efficient. Its corrugated steel surface reflects radiant heat back inwards, and its curved structure effectively deflects wind. However, wind was not the primary concern in this situation. The crucial factor was the shell's ability to prevent air leakage. Once the door was sealed and the stovepipe securely installed, no drafts occurred, preventing cold air from infiltrating at floor level. Heat was also prevented from escaping through cracks in the sealant. While that alone would have brought improvements, Vernon's significant benefit came from the barn itself, offering 12 meters of unobstructed area in all directions. The barn's walls bore the full force of the wind, shaking and groaning with each blast, yet the Quonset remained in complete stillness. There was no convective heat loss or wind chill effect, removing warmth from the steel structure. The air within the barn remained cool, perhaps 5 to 8 degrees Celsius warmer than the exterior. Nevertheless, it was stagnant air, and motionless air transmits heat considerably slower than air in motion. Additionally, Vernon arranged his firewood along the barn's inner walls, shielding it from precipitation. Within that arid, airy environment, even freshly cut wood would dry quickly. By the middle of December, he possessed completely dry fuel readily accessible near the Quonset's entrance. Gone were the days of dragging damp logs through snowdrifts or striving to maintain a fire with wood that merely steamed rather than burning. The barrel stove was compact, possibly a fourth the size of the fireplace in his previous dwelling. However, a large size was unnecessary. The Quonset's internal capacity measured 300 cubic feet. In contrast to the cabin's 1,500, warming a more confined area demanded reduced fuel consumption and less duration. Furthermore, as the steel shell uniformly emitted heat, there were no chilly spots or ineffective zones where warmth accumulated pointlessly near the ceiling. Vernon had the ability to fill the stove at dusk, cover the embers with ash, and awaken 8 hours later to an interior that maintained a temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit. In his former cabin, he would typically wake to 40, occasionally 35 degrees. Yet the scientific principles were of no concern to anyone. Their focus was solely on outward impressions, and the impression given was that Vernon Hadley, a man in the prime of his life, had withdrawn into a metallic enclosure within a barn, akin to a recluse or a timid individual. News traveled rapidly throughout a county where all residents were acquainted. "Hadley's residing in his barn these days," people would remark at the grain elevator, the local eatery, and during Sunday church gatherings. He constructed a small refuge for himself, claiming it made him warmer. Initially, the amusement was subdued, marked by a smirk or a raised eyebrow, but it intensified. Charlie Brennan, a carpenter renowned for 3 decades of experience in constructing durable homes, observed Vernon's arrangement in late November. With his arms folded, he stood in the barn's entrance, gazing at the Quonset as if it were an affront. Charlie declared, "That isn't a dwelling, it's merely a cursed grain silo." Vernon offered no dispute. He simply nodded and stated it was adequate for the moment. Charlie retorted, "Just wait until that heater makes the metal too hot to touch the interior surfaces. Anticipate constant dripping from condensation throughout the night. Just wait until the true chill arrives." Many others shared this opinion. One afternoon, Paul Dietrich, a cattle rancher known for his resilience in managing 500 livestock, paid a visit. Upon seeing the inside, a sleeping bag on a camp bed, a wood-burning heater, and illuminated shelves affixed to the quartz's structural supports, he burst into laughter. It resembled a submersible vessel. Good heavens, Vernon, Paul uttered, shaking his head. Are you becoming a recluse working at the post office? Vernon overheard a conversation between two individuals, one being a farmhand from an adjacent property, who stated that genuine men do not evade winter. The second man concurred, asserting that they confront it. My grandfather constructed a sod dwelling with an earthen floor and brought up 6 children there. Paddy possesses a perfectly adequate cabin, yet he chooses to sleep in a barn. Even Vernon's sibling, phoning from Billings, conveyed her worry. Folks are discussing it, she mentioned. They believe you're having difficulties. Vernon assured her he was well, in fact, better than well, feeling warmer, consuming half the amount of firewood, and sleeping soundly through the entire night without needing to get up to replenish the flames. She commented. That sounds solitary. Perhaps it was, but solitude wouldn't cause one to freeze to death. The criticism extended beyond merely the physical dwelling. It concerned what the construction symbolized within a society that prized independence, resilience, and a particular form of robust manliness. Withdrawing into a more compact, an unfamiliar type of refuge seemed akin to surrendering, like acknowledging an inability to cope with what one's neighbors managed. Vernon held a different perspective. He perceived both an issue and its remedy. The issue at hand was the dissipation of warmth. The remedy involved minimizing exposed area, preventing air currents, and ensuring the fuel remained arid. However, no one requested his explanation. People simply presumed he had succumbed to the strain of a difficult existence and a harsh environment. By the middle of December, Vernon had ceased visiting town unless absolutely necessary. This was not due to embarrassment. He felt none, but rather because he was weary of justifying a choice that, in his view, required no vindication. He would ascertain his correctness in due course. On the 7th of January 1978, the National Weather Service disseminated alerts throughout Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming. A substantial, sluggishly advancing low-pressure system, laden with humidity, was descending from Alberta. Meteorologists referred to it as a bomb cyclone. Temperatures were predicted to drop sharply, gusts would surpass 80 kilometers per hour, and snowfall would persist for multiple days. This was not an overstatement. By the dawn of January 9th, the mercury in northern Montana had plunged to 18 degrees below zero. By midday, it registered 28 degrees below. The gale transformed the atmosphere into a tangible substance, one capable of searing unprotected skin within moments. Cattle farmers hurried to move their animals indoors. Residents sealed windows with duct tape, piled sandbags against entryways, and retrieved every single blanket from their storage. Subsequently, the snowfall commenced. Not the delicate scenic variety. This was dense, moisture-laden snow. Snow propelled by the wind engulfed fence lines, caused sheds to collapse, and transformed roadways into impassable channels. Snowplows were unable to cope. The burden of ice caused power lines to break. By the 11th of January, entire communities found themselves isolated. The individual residing closest to Vernon was Ed Larson. His home was situated 1.5 miles to the south. Ed possessed a robust, 2-story residence. Its construction included a wooden frame and contemporary insulation. He also owned a propane furnace, with a wood stove serving as a backup. The propane supply was depleted on the storm's second day. The tank's refill was scheduled for December, but the delivery truck never arrived. Consequently, Ed began using the wood stove exclusively. The difficulty stemmed from his firewood stack being located outside, submerged under 4 feet of snow. Any pieces he managed to unearth were thoroughly soaked. Starting a single log required 20 minutes and an entire newspaper, and even then, it primarily smoldered instead of flaming. Ed's indoor thermometer, located near the kitchen, registered 41 degrees. By night, the temperature fell to 35. He layered on clothing and resorted to burning furniture for warmth. Even while sleeping in the same room as the stove, he still awoke shivering. Other families, however, experienced more severe conditions. 6 miles to the west, a ranch house's chimney failed when ice fractured the flue. Smoke then permeated the interior, compelling the family to seek refuge in their truck with the engine running. Using gasoline they could not replace, they survived for 2 days until a snowmobiler located them and transported them to town. The wind proved unyielding. Gusts of 50 miles per hour vibrated walls and stripped shingles from roofs. The sheer noise was draining, a continuous thunder resembling the sound next to a jet engine. And the cold. On January 12th, the official temperature in Cut Bank, Montana, registered 47 degrees below zero. With the wind chill factor, it felt like 70 below. This was the sort of cold that transforms diesel into a gel and freezes moisture within your lungs. It's the kind that proves fatal to cattle standing in open pastures. No one was venturing outside unless it was an absolute necessity. Inside, we find Quonset hut. Vernon Hadley sat beside the barrel stove, supplying it with one piece of dry pine every 2 hours. The temperature within the hut remained steady at 62 degrees. Remain with me, because once the storm finally abated and people began comparing their experiences, the data Vernon recorded caused even the skeptics to fall silent. Please hit the like button if you're still watching and share your location in the comments. I'm curious to see where everyone is tuning in from. The blizzard endured for 6 days. When it finally ceased on January 15th, the sky cleared to a harsh, crystalline blue. It was the kind of cold that makes the air itself perceptible, with frozen moisture suspended in shafts of sunlight. Each exhalation formed a visible vapor. The thermometer still registered 31 degrees below freezing. By midday, the scenery was unrecognizable. Snowdrifts reached 10 feet high against structures. Whole automobiles were submerged, and electrical cables were severed for miles. Thoroughfares would remain impassable for an additional week. Ed Larson, riding a snowmobile, was the initial person to reach Vernon's property in the mid-afternoon. Ed anticipated discovering Vernon in a difficult state, possibly confined to the primary cabin, perhaps conserving his remaining firewood. However, he located Vernon outside the storage barn. He was chopping timber while wearing only a shirt. "Are you all right?" Ed shouted above the sound of the motor, removing his head covering. Vernon raised his gaze and gave a nod. "I'm doing well, and yourself?" Ed shut off the motor. "I was freezing for 6 days, consumed 3 weeks' worth of wood, nearly depleted my supply," he paused, observing Vernon closely. "Are you being serious?" "You are fine. Come take a look." Ed trailed behind Vernon as they entered the barn. The internal temperature was distinctly higher than the exterior, perhaps by 5 or 10 degrees. It remained chilly, yet the wind had ceased, and positioned centrally within that vast area was the Quonset structure, its metallic exterior mirroring the afternoon sun filtering through openings in the barn's paneling. Vernon unlatched the entrance. A surge of heat enveloped Ed as if it were a tangible object. He entered, his eyes adjusting. A temperature gauge was suspended from one of the metal supports, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. 68? "You must be joking," Ed exclaimed. Vernon indicated a compact journal resting on a temporary table, which was a board supported by 2 sawhorses, where readings were recorded every 4 hours. The lowest temperature reached inside here was 55 degrees. That occurred on the night of the 12th, when the outside temperature dropped to 47 below zero. I examined a notebook. The records were precise. Date, time, internal temperature, external temperature, and the amount of wood consumed on January 12th during the storm's most severe period. At 6 a.m., the internal reading was 58 degrees Fahrenheit, while the external was minus 43 degrees Fahrenheit. By 10 a.m., the interior was 62 degrees Fahrenheit, with the exterior at minus 47 degrees Fahrenheit. At 2 p.m., the interior registered 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and the exterior was minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit. By 6 p.m., the interior was 61 degrees Fahrenheit, and the exterior was minus 41 degrees Fahrenheit. At 10 p.m., the interior measured 57 degrees Fahrenheit, with the exterior at minus 39 degrees Fahrenheit. At 2 a.m., the interior was 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and the exterior was minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit. "How much wood did you consume?" Ed inquired as Vernon turned to a summary sheet. "A total of 112 pounds. Over 6 days, that averages approximately 18 to 19 pounds daily." Ed gazed intently at him. "I used 200 pounds per day, at the very least," Vernon affirmed with a nod. "I presume the majority of people likely did the same." The calculations for the 6-day period were astonishing. Despite burning 1,200 pounds of firewood, Ed still experienced shivering nights with temperatures in the low 30s. Vernon, however, had used slightly more than 100 pounds of wood and kept an indoor-outdoor temperature difference of 90 to 100 degrees. His efficiency wasn't merely improved, it was vastly superior. Ed questioned, "How is that possible? It's only steel, there's no insulation present." Vernon then explained the process to him. The quartzite exterior prevented any drafts. Each fissure and opening that typically allowed heat to escape was sealed. The barn also shielded against wind, preventing convective cooling on its outer face. The space, filled with air, between the barn's walls and the quartz served as a protective buffer, a stagnant area that reduced heat loss through conduction. Furthermore, the compact internal volume required less heating. Vernon noted that steel is quite effective at reflecting and radiating heat back. The barrel stove emits warmth in every direction, and the surrounding walls simply redirect it internally rather than allowing it to dissipate. Ed gestured towards the stovepipe, inquiring, "And what about that 6-inch pipe up there?" "It's double-walled where it penetrates the roof. There's certainly some heat loss, but it's minimal. The majority of the warmth remains concentrated at the lower level, precisely where I require it." Next, they considered the wood itself. Vernon unlatched the Quonset's entrance and indicated the piles stacked along the barn's inner surfaces. It was completely dry, shielded from snow, and aired by the barn's inherent ventilation. Vernon clarified that fresh wood can contain perhaps 50 to 60% water by weight. He stated, "You expend half your energy simply evaporating that moisture. Dry wood, being pure heat, combusts with greater intensity, cleanliness, and duration." Ed performed the necessary mental arithmetic. Considering Vernon's wood burned with double the efficiency solely because of its dryness, and his building lost heat at a significantly reduced pace, the figures indeed added up. The logic was so clear it was almost mortifying. Ed inquired, "Has Charlie been informed?" referring to Charlie Brennan, the carpenter who had previously labeled the Quonset a grain storage unit. Vernon, likely smiling, responded, "Not yet, he's going to despise this." As January concluded, the news had circulated widely. Individuals began to arrive, neighbors, ranchers, and even a county building inspector who, having heard the account indirectly, remained skeptical. Vernon welcomed each of them indoors. He presented his notebook to them and detailed the entire arrangement. A few offered apologies. The majority simply remained standing, observing their surroundings. Everyone present was reevaluating all their prior assumptions about maintaining warmth. A single particular detail resonated with each person. During the storm's most severe night, with the outdoor wind chill plummeting to 70 degrees below zero and families gathered around dwindling embers, Vernon Hadley had enjoyed a full night's sleep in only a t-shirt. There was no need for midnight refueling, no awakening to frosty breath on his pillow, just 8 continuous hours of rest in an environment that consistently stayed above 55 degrees. Charlie Brennan visited during the beginning of February. He remained largely silent, simply pacing around the Quonset, knocking on the steel with his knuckles, and closely examining the stove's configuration. Eventually, he faced Vernon and remarked, "You were fortunate," Charlie stated. Vernon gave a shrug, saying, "Perhaps. It still resembles a grain storage unit." "A warm grain silo," Charlie nearly cracked a smile, just barely. "Yes, that's fine." The warmth provided was the nearest thing to an apology Vernon would offer, a fact both men understood. The spring of 1978 arrived tardily. Snow persisted well into April. However, once the roadways were completely passable and cattlemen could travel unimpeded between their holdings, a change had occurred in the valley. Individuals no longer labeled Vernon a coward. Instead, they considered him astute. The initial modification emerged in March. Hank Faboda, a rancher operating a modest farm 15 miles to the south, possessed an unused old dairy barn. That winter, he had seen a third of his wood fuel ruined by dampness, almost causing his family to freeze. While Hank lacked an extra Quonset structure, he did have steel panels for roofing remaining from a shed construction. He constructed a 12 by 14-foot refuge within the barn, using 2x4s for the frame, covering it with the roof panels, and filling the spaces with straw for insulation. A compact wood-burning stove with its vent extending through the barn's roof was installed, and his family relocated inside for the final part of winter. It proved effective, though not with the same efficiency as Vernon's arrangement. The structure was less refined, The seals were not as secure, yet it functioned sufficiently. Hank's spouse subsequently informed Vernon that they had reduced their firewood usage by 50% and experienced greater warmth during sleep than throughout the entire season. Before summer arrived, an additional 3 families had constructed different versions of this idea. One family utilized a pole barn, incorporating a framed inner section covered with metal sheeting. A different family converted an old grain silo, creating an entrance and fitting a chimney. A third group merely insulated one corner of their current barn and resided in that specific area throughout the subsequent winter. While none precisely resembled Vernon's Quonset, they all adhered to the identical fundamental idea: construct a compact, sealed dwelling within a more substantial wind barrier. Employ the external framework to prevent convection, keep firewood in the intermediate space, and warm a reduced area using dry fuel. Robert Kilmer, the county's agricultural extension agent, whose role involved guiding farmers on topics ranging from crop sequencing to machinery upkeep, paid Vernon a visit in the latter part of May. He arrived with a notepad and a photographic device. "Would you object if I recorded this?" Robert inquired. "My intention is to compile a report and distribute it to other regions." Vernon consented. Robert dedicated an entire afternoon to taking measurements, capturing images, and conducting interviews. That autumn, he released a bulletin. Its subject was effective shelter for cold climates. The publication contained insights derived from the 1978 snowstorm. It featured schematics of our specific arrangement, records of temperatures, and statistics on wood usage. Furthermore, it comprised observations regarding alternative constructions created by other households. The informational report was distributed across Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. Certain individuals disregarded it, whereas others archived it as a mere point of interest. Nevertheless, a select group, those residing in less favorable regions, those with limited financial resources, and those who had almost frozen during that winter, took notice. By 1980, a minimum of 12 households within a 100-mile range had implemented a form of the barn-based shelter idea. Some were temporary, utilized solely in the chilliest periods, while others evolved into permanent residences. Close to Haver, a homesteader constructed a complete off-grid complex based on this concept, featuring a charming courtyard within a spacious pole barn, along with connected greenhouse areas designed to collect solar warmth throughout the day. Vernon, for his part, introduced several improvements. For natural illumination, he incorporated a small window on the southern side and created a vestibule entrance to minimize thermal escape upon opening the door. A drying rack was fitted above the stove for garments and equipment. During his third winter residing in the Quonset hut, his system was so accurately calibrated that he could forecast his weekly wood usage with an accuracy of 5 pounds. He never returned to live in the primary dwelling. He ultimately sold the property to a young pair and continued to inhabit the Quonset throughout the entire year. The public ceased viewing it as peculiar. It was simply recognized as Vernon's residence. The scorn, the criticism, and the derision gradually transformed into a reluctant admiration. This wasn't due to Vernon dramatically or confrontationally disproving others, but rather because his approach functioned silently and effectively when the emergency arose, when the severe cold was undeniable and survival was at stake. Without question, within a society that prioritized outcomes above mere words, this held greater significance than personal ego. An ancient adage from the Highlands states, "The climate is indifferent to your notions of appropriateness." Vernon Hadley had no intention of transforming how people lived in frigid conditions. He possessed neither a formal declaration nor a theoretical framework. He simply analyzed an issue, inefficient fuel use due to heat escape and harsh winds, and reduced it to its fundamental physical principles. Minimize space, prevent air currents, impede heat transfer, and ensure fuel remains arid. The Quonset structure within the barn lacked aesthetic appeal. It wasn't conventional. It didn't align with anyone's concept of an authentic dwelling, yet it sustained a man's life and comfort during a snowstorm that claimed animal lives, brought down structures, and left households trembling in their residences. The point overlooked by the doubters, by Charlie Brennan, Paul Dietrich, and all the rest, was that enduring doesn't necessitate hardship. Effectiveness isn't a flaw, and occasionally the most intelligent action is to construct on a smaller scale rather than a larger one. Brennan resided in that Quonset for an additional 18 years. He remained there in 1996 when a reporter from a local publication arrived to question him regarding pioneering resourcefulness. At that time, Vernon had reached 60 years of age, and the narrative had developed independently, amplified in certain accounts, condensed in others. The reporter inquired whether he would repeat the experience. Vernon paused to consider. "I would bypass the period when everyone labeled me insane," he stated, "but yes, I would undertake it once more. For when you confront temperatures of 47 degrees below zero and the gale attempts to tear your home's walls away, you don't require validation. You need an effective strategy." Vernon possessed such a strategy, and that proved to be decisive. I'd like to hear your thoughts now. Please leave a comment underneath. What is your viewing location, and what was the most frigid winter you have ever endured? Should you have gained insight from this narrative? If you acquired knowledge concerning effectiveness, fortitude, or innovative thinking when it counts, then press the subscribe button. Each week we present a single method, a unique tale, a solitary nugget of insight that enabled individuals to persist when circumstances provided no further opportunities. We appreciate your viewership. Remain warm in your surroundings. Informational disclaimer: this video offers historically influenced recreations for instructional and narrative objectives. The names of individuals and particular occurrences are fabricated, whereas the methods, ideas, and tenets explored are derived from genuine historical customs and recognized physical or practical understanding. Any contemporary implementation ought to be assessed in line with present benchmarks, safety directives, and relevant statutes or ordinances. The material provided is for instructional purposes and does not represent professional, technical, or legal counsel.